Hello everyone. Now we will figure out the frequently asked question, why does a new rubber feel different from an old one? I mean the same model of rubber. A player was using his rubber, and it became worn out over time. He bought a new one of the same model, but it doesn't play the same way as the old one did. Customers have been calling and writing to the store with complaints like, "What's going on? What happened? I was playing with this rubber, everything was fine. I bought new rubber to replace the worn-out one, but it plays differently." Situations like this occur often. People report that the new rubber feels different from the old one, and now they feel uncomfortable, miss the table, and don't know how to live now. Let's figure out what's going on and what to do. The issue with the difference between the new and old rubber is that, after playing for a long time, rubber gradually wears out, and the player gets used to all these changes. He's used to the rubber in the state it was in before he took it off to replace it with a new one. And because of wear of the old rubber, the new one has different playing characteristics. You understand, if there were no differences, why would anyone bother replacing the old rubber with a new one? You could continue playing with the old one forever, but at some point, it reaches a state where it no longer performs properly and prevents you from playing quality tennis. So, it needs to be replaced. But for some reason, not everyone notices and understands what's happening here. What happens is this: the player glues a new rubber and experiences the contrast between the properties of the brand new rubber just out of the package and the old, worn-out one that he has gotten used to. The old, worn-out rubber feels familiar and comfortable. And the new one is sometimes considered suspicious, potentially wrong. The customer wonders, it plays differently. Maybe it was stored improperly and got damaged. No, it hasn't been damaged. It's very difficult to damage rubber from improper storage under normal conditions. So, the situation of the rubber getting damaged from storage is incredibly rare. Another suspicion that arises among some players is, could it be a counterfeit? In such a case, the user may think they were sold something fake. But in reality, this is just the normal objective difference between a new and worn-out product. The same kind of difference can be seen not only in rubbers but also in other items, like shoes. If you compare a worn-out pair of shoes with a nearly new one, you'll notice significant differences. New shoes may not feel as comfortable as the worn-out ones at first. By the way, while we're creating interesting and useful videos and reviews for you, don't forget to visit our TT Maximum store more often to shop. It will be your best thank you for our videos. In fact, there are several reasons for the difference between a new and old rubber. The first one is normal wear, which we've already discussed. The second reason is that the rubber, which has been on the racket for a long time, has undergone changes beyond just game wear. The rubber can react with the glue it's applied with cleaning agents used on it, with air, and other substances. I don't claim to know all the factors that influence these changes, but I've noticed that rubbers that have been on rackets for a long time can change their properties. The rubber can become stiffer, change color, and the surface can become slippery. These changes don't occur due to wear but because of chemical processes happening in the rubber. From this observation, we can conclude that old rubbers that have gone through such processes can change their properties. The player got used to the rubber in its changed state. Of course, this also creates a contrast between the old rubber and the new one. These complaints are most often from players who have been using the same racket for a long time, for years, without changing the rubber. These changes occur over many years, 5, 10 or more. But I want to emphasize again that these changes only happen with rubbers that have been in use for a long time, not with rubbers that have been sitting in a store or in a closet. The next reason for differences in the properties of a new rubber is changes in the rubber formula. There are two aspects to this. First, some low-cost Chinese manufacturers don't ensure stability in production. For reasons unknown to me, rubbers of the same model can play differently depending on the batch. Users of such rubbers experience discomfort when, after getting used to certain properties, they buy a new rubber, and it plays differently. This is an inconsistency in quality, and that's why we refuse to work with such manufacturers when we identify this problem. The second aspect regarding changes in the rubber formula doesn't depend on the brand's price category. Sometimes manufacturers change the composition of the rubber, and this happens with all brands, including Stiga, Andro, Butterfly, and so on. As a result, the rubber's properties may slightly change. For example, a rubber might had certain properties 3 years ago, but now, due to changes in the formula, it plays slightly differently. Maybe you don't like this, maybe you don't care. Some people notice these changes, others don't. In general, this situation does sometimes occur, and we can't influence it. All we can do is sip tea and accept it. By the way, friends, if you haven't clicked like and subscribe to the channel yet, please do so right now. You'll earn a karma point. The next reason for the difference between an old and new rubber is the difference in sponge thickness. Sometimes users can make mistakes when choosing sponge thickness, for example, buying a 2.0 instead of a 2.2 mm rubber. The difference of 0.2 of a millimeter might not be dramatic, but it's still noticeable. In some cases, if the manufacturer doesn't maintain quality control, there might be variation in sponge thickness. Some rubbers labeled as 2.2 mm may actually have a thickness of 2.0 mm or even 1.9 mm. If you want to be sure you have the right thickness rubber, use a special small gauge. Once, we encountered a case where the rubber was labeled as 2.0 mm, but its actual thickness was 1.5 mm. It also happened that one side had a 2 mm sponge thickness and the other side was 1.8 mm. Such a rubber, of course, will play differently than expected. Such discrepancies are possible with cheaper brands. When we encountered this situation, we stopped buying such rubbers. We don't want our customers to face such inconveniences. But these rubbers are still sold in other places. The next point concerns the technology of gluing the rubber onto the blade. The rubber might be glued with stretching, which alters its playing characteristics. This can happen if a player vigorously rolls the rubber with a roller during gluing to ensure a good bond. In addition to being glued, the rubber stretches and becomes thinner, like a dough being rolled out for dumplings. The playing characteristics of the rubber change depending on how much it was stretched. This effect especially can be noticeable with soft rubbers because they are more susceptible to stretching. The player may not even notice that they accidentally stretched the rubber. However, it will play differently. If you remove the rubber and re-glue it without stretching it, its usual properties will return. It's also important to consider the effect of the glue layer. If you have long pips without a sponge and glue them with a thick layer of glue, it will affect the playing characteristics a bit. A thick glue layer acts like an additional cushion between the rubber and the blade, which changes the playing feel. Finally, there's the influence of boosters. Boosters can significantly alter the properties of the rubber. If the old rubber was treated with a booster, and the new one was not, the difference will be very noticeable. This is something to keep in mind, especially if you're buying a used rubber and don't know what's been done to it. That's all for now. If you have any questions on this topic, feel free to ask in the comments below the video.